You ever watch someone live stream themselves committing a crime with full confidence like they're the main character in a made-up reality show? Yeah, that happened on my ranch. A self-declared HOA president with a clipboard and a god complex showed up, slapped fake violation stickers on my truck, and brought a tow truck, all while thousands watched live. No HOA ever existed here, but that didn't stop her from inventing bylaws, election results, and quiet hours for toddlers. By the time the sirens showed up, even the lawn chairs came out. Buckle up, this one's got fake badges, real crimes, and a twist she never saw coming. Drop a comment where you're watching from, especially if you've ever met a Karen with a clipboard. And stick around. Justice makes an entrance when you least expect it. It was a peaceful Tuesday morning when I first witnessed Pamela Hutchinson in action. I was working on my ranch fence, enjoying the quiet that comes with living on 12 acres outside Pine Ridge County, Texas. The morning sun was just burning off the dew when I heard raised voices coming from my neighbor Hank Peterson's place. Now Hank's a 72-year-old retired construction foreman who minds his own business and flies an American flag on a pole in his front yard. He's been doing that for 20 years without a single complaint. So when I saw a woman in a cheap blazer marching across his field with a clipboard, I knew something was wrong. I'd gotten to know Hank over the past 3 years since I'd bought this ranch, drawn to the peace and quiet that comes with rural living after spending decades dealing with the worst of human nature in law enforcement. Hank had been the first neighbor to welcome me, showing up with a six-pack of beer and stories about the land that went back generations. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home to build houses and raise a family, and had earned every ounce of respect he commanded in this community. Watching him tend to that flag every morning had become part of my routine, seeing him raise it at dawn and lower it at dusk, with the kind of reverence that only comes from someone who truly understands what it represents. This woman, who I'd later learn was Pamela Hutchinson, approached Hank's flag like she was conducting a military inspection. She had highlighted blonde hair in a severe bob cut, oversized sunglasses, and was wearing what looked like a knockoff designer blazer that had seen better days. But it was the clipboard that caught my attention. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I've learned that people who carry clipboards in residential neighborhoods usually fall into 2 categories: legitimate officials doing their jobs, or scam artists pretending to have authority they don't possess. Something about this woman's demeanor told me she fell into the second category. Being a sheriff in a place like this means understanding the delicate balance between protection and patience. You don't build trust in rural communities by charging in with badges blazing every time there's a problem. Sometimes the best thing a lawman can do is step back and let people reveal their true nature before you decide how to respond. It's a lesson that took me years to learn, and one that would prove crucial in dealing with Pamela Hutchinson. My instincts were telling me that this woman wasn't just a one-time problem. She was someone who would escalate until she either got what she wanted or got stopped by something bigger than the people she was trying to intimidate. I watched as she pointed at Hank's flag and started gesticulating wildly. Even from 50 yards away, I could hear her raised voice, talking about neighborhood standards and aesthetic violations. Hank looked confused, which made sense because there had never been any homeowners association in our area. We're a rural community where people bought property specifically to avoid that kind of bureaucratic nonsense. But this woman was acting like she had some kind of official authority, taking photos of the flag from multiple angles and making notes on her clipboard like she was documenting evidence for a court case. That's when I had to make a decision that would define everything that followed. As the county sheriff, I could have walked over there immediately, shown my badge, and shut down whatever scam she was running. But something made me pause. In my experience, people like this don't just target one person. They're usually building up to something bigger. If I intervened too early, I might stop this particular incident, but miss the chance to catch her in a more serious crime. So I made a choice that reflected everything I'd learned about patience, justice, and the difference between stopping a crime and preventing future ones. The conversation between Pamela and Hank escalated quickly. She was claiming to be the president of a newly established homeowners association and insisting that his flag violated some made-up aesthetic guidelines. Hank kept asking what HOA she was talking about, but she just got louder and more aggressive. She threatened him with legal action, fines, and even mentioned getting the authorities involved. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was threatening to call law enforcement while standing 50 yards away from the actual sheriff. But Hank didn't know I was law enforcement, and neither did she. This ranch represented more than just a home to me. It was a place where I could separate the weight of my badge from the simple pleasure of working with my hands and living close to the land. My grandfather had been a rancher in East Texas, and some of my earliest memories were of helping him mend fences and tend cattle. There's something about that kind of work that keeps you grounded, reminds you that real strength comes from building things rather than tearing them down. Watching this woman try to tear down Hank's dignity with fake authority felt like a personal affront to everything I believed about how neighbors should treat each other. After about 20 minutes of harassment, Hank finally gave in. I watched this proud veteran take down the American flag he'd flown for 2 decades because some woman with a clipboard scared him into compliance. The look of defeat on his face made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm and professional. That night, I made another decision that would prove crucial later. I installed hidden security cameras around my property. If this woman was going to escalate her activities, I wanted everything documented. I had a feeling I was going to need evidence, and I was right. 2 months passed, and I kept a casual eye on Pamela's activities around the neighborhood. She'd established what she called a temporary HOA office in her garage, complete with hand-painted signs and filing cabinets full of made-up violations. She'd drive around the area in her aging BMW, looking for new targets and imaginary infractions, but she was careful to stay just on the legal side of harassment. Until the morning she decided to go after my truck. That's when her little game of playing pretend authority was about to collide head-on with the real thing. If I'd known what she was planning, I might have stopped her. But honestly, I'm glad I didn't, because what happened next was exactly the kind of lesson she needed to learn, and exactly the kind of justice that our community deserved to see. 24 hours after Pamela's ultimatum, I was having my morning coffee when I saw her marching across the field toward my property. She'd clearly spent the night preparing for what she considered the next phase of her campaign. This time, she wasn't just carrying a clipboard. She had a whole arsenal of fake authority. Laminated badges hung around her neck. Official-looking violation stickers were stacked in her hand, and she was wearing what appeared to be a security guard's utility belt loaded with measuring tape, a camera, and folders full of documents. I watched from my kitchen window as she approached my pickup truck, which was parked exactly where it had been the day before, completely legally on my own property just outside my fence line. The truck was a standard Ford F-150, nothing fancy, just a working man's vehicle that I used for ranch duties. It didn't have any police markings because it was my personal truck, not a department vehicle. But apparently, in Pamela's mind, it represented a direct challenge to her newly claimed authority, and she was about to make her biggest mistake yet. She started by photographing my truck from every conceivable angle, like she was documenting evidence for a major crime. Then she began placing bright orange violation stickers on the windows, the kind of stickers that are designed to be difficult to remove and leave residue when you try. Each sticker had official-looking text about HOA violations and warnings about non-compliance. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice me coming outside until I spoke up. "Ma'am, what exactly are you doing to my vehicle?" I asked in the calmest voice I could manage. Pamela spun around with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "These are legitimate HOA violations," she announced, waving her clipboard like a weapon. She pointed to the fake badge around her neck that read Community Standards Director in bold letters. "Your vehicle has been parked in violation of Section 4.2 of the Pine Ridge HOA bylaws for over 24 hours. The fact that she was quoting made-up regulations from a non-existent HOA with such conviction was almost impressive. Almost. I walked over to examine the stickers she'd placed on my truck. Each one listed violations like unauthorized overnight parking, blocking emergency access routes, and failure to comply with community vehicle standards. The irony was that my truck was parked on my own property, there were no emergency access routes anywhere near my driveway, and there were no community vehicle standards because there was no community association. But Pamela had clearly spent considerable time and effort creating these official-looking documents, complete with fake legal language and reference numbers. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of your authority," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. This was exactly the kind of question that legitimate officials expect and welcome, but scam artists hate. Pamela's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of producing credentials, she got defensive and started talking louder. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she declared. "I'm the elected president of this HOA, and these documents speak for themselves." She thrust a stack of papers at me that looked like they'd been printed from free templates downloaded from the internet. As I was examining her fake paperwork, my police radio crackled to life from inside the truck. "Sheriff Callahan, respond when available for a status update on the Riverside incident," came the dispatcher's voice. I quickly reached through the open window and turned down the volume, but not before Pamela heard it. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why do they keep calling you Sheriff?" she asked. I could see the wheels turning in her head, but her ego was too big to let her reach the obvious conclusion. "It's a common name around here," I replied casually, probably picking up crosstalk from other radios. It wasn't technically a lie. Callahan is indeed a common name in our county, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, her need to assert dominance was stronger than her sense of caution. "Well, Mr. Callahan," she said with exaggerated formality, "you have until tomorrow morning to move this vehicle, or I'll be forced to take enforcement action." The way she said enforcement action with such dramatic emphasis would have been funny if it wasn't so concerning. Just then, Hank Peterson came shuffling over from his house, coffee mug in hand and curiosity written all over his weathered face. "Wade, what's this woman doing to your truck?" he asked. Pamela immediately turned on him like a drill sergeant addressing a recruit. "Mr. Peterson, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your property." But Hank had clearly had enough of being pushed around. "Like hell it doesn't concern me," he shot back. "This lady made me take down my American flag, and now she's harassing you too? Something ain't right here." The mention of the flag incident was like lighting a fuse inside me. I could feel my jaw tighten and my hands clench into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. Pamela, however, saw Hank's comment as an opportunity to showcase her power. "That flag violated aesthetic standards for the community," she announced proudly. "I've successfully resolved 12 violations in this area, including that unsightly display." The casual way she dismissed a veteran's right to fly the American flag on his own property told me everything I needed to know about her character. "You made him remove the American flag?" I asked, my voice carrying just a hint of the authority I usually kept hidden when I was off duty. Something in my tone must have registered with both Hank and Pamela, because they both looked at me with renewed attention. Hank seemed to sense that there was more to me than met the eye, while Pamela appeared to be reconsidering whether she might have bitten off more than she could chew, but her pride and arrogance won out over her instincts. "Community standards must be maintained," she declared with finality. "And speaking of standards, Mr. Callahan, you have 18 hours to comply with my directive." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with a truck covered in fake violation stickers and a growing certainty that tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. At exactly 7 in the morning, I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when I heard the rumble of a large truck engine approaching my property. Through my security monitor, I watched Pamela arrive in her BMW, followed closely by a tow truck. She'd actually done it. She'd hired someone to steal my vehicle. What made it even more surreal was that she'd set up her phone on a tripod to live stream the entire event. "Good morning, everyone," she announced to her camera, with the enthusiasm of a morning talk show host. "Today we're enforcing HOA regulations against a non-compliant resident who ignored official warnings." The tow truck driver was a young kid named Tyler, probably in his early 20s, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as Pamela directed him to hook up my truck. I could hear her through the open window explaining to her live stream audience that this was a legitimate enforcement action against an abandoned vehicle that had been properly documented and reported. The fact that she was broadcasting her own crime in real time was almost too perfect. I grabbed my phone to record backup footage while I watched her dig her own legal grave. I walked outside with my coffee still steaming, projecting the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly how this situation was going to end. "Morning, folks," I called out cheerfully. "Lovely day for Grand Theft Auto." Tyler immediately stopped what he was doing and looked up with the expression of someone who was beginning to realize he'd made a serious error in judgment. Pamela, however, doubled down on her performance for the camera. "This resident ignored official HOA notices," she declared dramatically. "We have no choice but to remove this abandoned vehicle." The livestream comments were already exploding, with viewers pointing out the obvious problems with her story. "Lady, the guy standing right there, how is it abandoned?" And "this looks super illegal," were among the more printable responses flooding her feed. But Pamela was so focused on maintaining her authority performance that she wasn't paying attention to the growing chorus of people calling her out. Tyler, meanwhile, was getting more nervous by the minute as he looked back and forth between me and Pamela. "Son, let me show you something," I said to Tyler, pulling out my vehicle registration and insurance cards. "This is my truck, on my property, with all the proper documentation." Tyler examined the papers and then looked at Pamela with obvious confusion. "Lady, you told me this was an abandoned vehicle on community property," he said. But this guy has all the right paperwork, and he's clearly the owner. Pamela's response was to get louder and more insistent. He's interfering with official HOA business. I paid you $150 to remove this vehicle. That admission was pure gold. She'd just confessed on live stream to paying someone to steal my truck. The comments section was going absolutely wild, with viewers sharing the stream and tagging local news outlets. Ma'am, I said with exaggerated politeness, you just admitted to hiring someone to steal my vehicle, on camera, with about 3,000 witnesses. The viewer count was climbing rapidly as people shared the stream with captions like, Karen tries to steal sheriff's truck, though they didn't know how accurate that description actually was. Tyler had heard enough. Look, lady, I don't want any part of this, he said, starting to unhook my truck. Keep your money, this is way too sketchy for me. But Pamela wasn't about to let her moment of authority slip away. You have a contract, she shrieked. I'll sue you for breach of contract if you don't complete this job. The poor kid looked like he wanted to disappear. Ma'am, you told me it was abandoned property. You didn't mention the owner would be standing here with paperwork. That's when Pamela made her biggest mistake yet. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there on live stream, with the speakerphone on so everyone could hear. I need police immediately, she announced to the dispatcher. There's a resident interfering with legitimate HOA enforcement, and I need officers to arrest him for obstruction. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She was calling my own department to report me for defending my own property. The dispatcher, trained to handle all sorts of unusual calls, tried to explain that HOA disputes were civil matters, but Pamela insisted that crimes were being committed. This man is threatening violence and interfering with official business, she lied boldly to the 911 operator. I had to admire her commitment to the performance, even as she was committing multiple felonies in front of thousands of witnesses. The viewer count had climbed to over 5,000, and the comments were a mix of outrage, amusement, and people tagging their friends to watch the disaster unfold. By this point, Hank Peterson had emerged from his house with a lawn chair and what appeared to be a bag of popcorn. This is better than cable TV, he announced to no one in particular, settling in to watch the show. Other neighbors were starting to appear on their porches and in their yards, drawn by the commotion and the sound of Pamela's increasingly shrill voice. What none of them knew was that sirens were already approaching in the distance, and Pamela was about to get exactly what she'd asked for, just not in the way she expected. Tyler had completely given up on the towing job and was packing up his equipment. Lady, I'm out of here, he declared. Keep your $150. This whole thing is nuts. As he drove away, Pamela was left standing alone, with her clipboard, her fake badges, and a live stream full of people who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something truly special. Justice is coming, she announced to her camera with supreme confidence. The authorities will sort this out. She had no idea how right she was, or how wrong she was, about who was going to be sorted out. Deputy Lacey Collins arrived in her patrol car with the professional demeanor of someone who dealt with her share of unusual calls. At 28 years old, she was one of our department's rising stars, sharp, thorough, and unflappable in difficult situations. As she stepped out of her vehicle, she immediately assessed the scene. A woman with a clipboard live streaming on her phone, a calm man holding a coffee cup, and a growing crowd of neighbors watching from a safe distance. What's the situation here? She asked, in the authoritative but approachable tone that good officers master early in their careers. Pamela immediately rushed toward Deputy Collins like a woman who'd been waiting her entire life for this moment of vindication. Officer, thank God you're here, she gushed, clutching her clipboard to her chest. This man has been interfering with legitimate HOA enforcement. I have documented evidence of multiple violations, and he's been obstructing official business. She thrust her stack of fake documents toward Lacey with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed her own lies. The live stream was capturing every word, and the viewer count had climbed past 10,000 as people shared the link across social media platforms. Lacey took the documents and examined them with the practiced eye of someone trained to spot fraudulent paperwork. Ma'am, step back and calm down, she instructed firmly. Let me understand what's happening here. Then she turned to me with the kind of respectful attention that comes naturally when addressing someone who carries themselves with quiet authority. Sir, could you explain your side of the story? There was something in the way she said it that suggested she recognized something familiar about me, though she maintained complete professionalism. Afternoon, Deputy Collins, I replied, noting her name from her badge but saying it in a way that suggested familiarity. It was a small detail, but one that didn't escape either Pamela's notice or that of the live stream audience. I'd be happy to explain the situation. This lady has been harassing neighbors for months, claiming to represent a homeowners association that doesn't exist. Today, she hired a tow truck to steal my vehicle from my own property. I kept my explanations simple and factual, letting the evidence speak for itself. Deputy Collins began her investigation with the methodical approach that separates good cops from mediocre ones. "Ma'am, when was this HOA established?" she asked Pamela. "Do you have county registration documents?" These were exactly the right questions to ask, and Pamela's responses revealed the depth of her deception. "Last month," she claimed confidently, "there was a unanimous neighborhood vote, and I was elected president." She pointed toward Hank Peterson, who was still watching from his lawn chair. "He can confirm my authority." Hank nearly choked on his coffee. "Confirm what?" he called out. "Lady, you're nuttier than a fruitcake. There ain't never been no HOA around here, and nobody elected you to nothin'." His blunt assessment drew chuckles from the other neighbors and a wave of laughing emojis in the live stream comments. Pamela's face reddened as she realized her supposed witness was testifying against her rather than for her. Lacey continued her professional inquiry, asking to see my vehicle registration and property documentation. I produced everything immediately, of course, since I was the legitimate owner of both the truck and the land it was parked on. "Officer, I'd like to file several complaints," I said in a tone that carried just a hint of the authority I normally wielded. "This woman has committed trespassing, attempted theft, harassment, and filing false emergency reports." The way I listed the charges seemed to register with Deputy Collins, who looked at me with increased attention. When Lacey keyed her radio to request supervisory assistance, the response from dispatch created one of those perfect moments that you couldn't script if you tried. "Unit 12 requesting supervisor at 847 Ranch Road," she transmitted. The response came back immediately. "Copy that, Unit 12. Sheriff Callahan is en route to your location. ETA 5 minutes." The effect on Pamela was immediate and visible. Confusion, then suspicion, then the beginning of a terrible realization that something was very wrong with her understanding of the situation. "Why does everyone keep saying Callahan?" Pamela demanded, her voice rising with the first hints of panic. "That's the third time someone's called that name on the radio." Lacey maintained her professional composure, but I could see the slight smile she was trying to suppress. "Ma'am, when the sheriff arrives, please remain calm and allow him to address your concerns," she said diplomatically. The live stream chat was going absolutely crazy with speculation, with some viewers beginning to piece together what was really happening. I checked my phone and saw that the viewer count had climbed past 15,000, with people sharing the stream and creating hashtags like Sheriff Justice and Karen Meets Reality. Pamela was still live streaming, oblivious to the fact that she was broadcasting her own downfall to an increasingly large audience. "Perfect," she announced to her camera with renewed confidence. "The sheriff will sort out this corrupt deputy and this obstinate resident. Finally, some real authority." The sound of an approaching vehicle with a powerful engine began to fill the air, and I could see Pamela straightening her blazer and organizing her fake documents for what she believed would be her moment of ultimate vindication. Deputy Collins stood at professional attention while Hank Peterson leaned forward in his lawn chair with obvious anticipation. The other neighbors had moved closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even Tyler, the tow truck driver, had returned and was watching from his vehicle parked down the road. As the sheriff's official county vehicle came into view, complete with emergency lights and full law enforcement markings, Pamela's confidence reached its absolute peak. "Justice is here," she announced to her live stream audience, with the satisfaction of someone who believed she was about to be completely vindicated. "The real authority has arrived to deal with these people." She had no idea that she was about to experience the most humiliating moment of her life, broadcast live to thousands of strangers who were about to witness perfect karma in action. The sheriff's official county vehicle pulled up with the kind of authority that only comes with legitimate law enforcement. As the door opened and a boot hit the gravel, Pamela rushed forward with her clipboard raised like a battle standard, ready to finally present her case to what she believed was the ultimate authority who would vindicate her months of neighborhood enforcement. "Sheriff, thank God you're here," she called out, her voice filled with the confidence of someone who thought she was about to win the biggest victory of her life. "I need to report serious misconduct by both this resident and your deputy." But as the figure in the official sheriff's uniform turned around, Pamela's world came crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Standing before her in full law enforcement regalia, complete with badge, duty belt, and all the trappings of real authority, was the same man she'd been harassing for months. The same man she'd been threatening to have arrested. "Hello again, Ms. Hutchinson," I said with the calm authority that comes from 25 years of law enforcement experience. "I'm Sheriff Wade Callahan." The effect on Pamela was immediate and devastating. She stopped mid-stride as if she'd hit an invisible wall, her mouth falling open in a perfect expression of shocked disbelief. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and scattered fake documents across the gravel. The color drained from her face so completely that she looked like she might faint right there on the spot. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and she began blinking repeatedly as if trying to clear a hallucination. For several long seconds, the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the distant hum of thousands of people typing furiously in the live stream comments as they realized they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. The live stream chat had exploded into absolute chaos. Comments were flying by so fast they were almost impossible to read. Is this real life? I need a movie about this. She about to pass out. Best karma video ever. No way, no way, no way. Her face, though, called the cops on the cop. R.I.P. Karen. I'm crying laughing. Screenshot her face, please. This can't be real. Plot twist of the century. She's glitching. Karen XC has stopped working. I can't breathe. This is better than Netflix. Someone call an ambulance for Karen. Her soul just left her body. Live streaming your own destruction. The secondhand embarrassment is real. I'm saving this forever. The viewer count had exploded past 25,000 and was climbing rapidly as people shared the link across every social media platform imaginable. This isn't possible," Pamela stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands were visibly shaking now, and she seemed to be having trouble staying upright. "You're just a rancher. You live on a ranch. You can't be." But the evidence was right in front of her, wearing a badge and speaking with the unmistakable authority of someone who'd spent decades serving and protecting the community. Deputy Collins stepped forward to provide official confirmation, and the respectful way she addressed me left no doubt about the hierarchy here. "Ma'am, Sheriff Callahan has been investigating multiple complaints about harassment and fake authority claims in this area. We've received reports about your activities from several residents." Hank Peterson had risen from his lawn chair and was walking closer to get a better view of Pamela's complete meltdown. "Well, I'll be damned," he said with obvious satisfaction. "Wade, you've been playing the long game this whole time, haven't you?" There was admiration in his voice, the recognition of a man who appreciated strategic thinking and perfect timing. Tyler, the young tow truck driver who had returned to watch the spectacle, was standing next to his vehicle with his mouth hanging open. "Lady tried to get the sheriff's truck towed," he muttered to himself. No wonder this felt so wrong. The live stream exploded with comments as viewers realized what they were witnessing. "Holy crap, the rancher is the sheriff, and this is the best karma video ever," filled the chat, along with hundreds of people tagging friends and sharing the stream to other platforms. The viewer count was approaching 30,000, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Pamela's face had gone completely white as the full magnitude of her situation began to sink in. She was swaying slightly on her feet, and I genuinely worried she might collapse. "You tricked me," Pamela suddenly burst out, her voice cracking with desperation. "This is entrapment. You deliberately deceived me about who you were. This isn't fair." The accusation hung in the air for a moment before I responded with the calm patience that comes from dealing with desperate people making desperate claims. "Ma'am, I never lied to you about anything. You never asked what I did for a living. You assumed I was just a rancher because that fit your narrative about being able to push me around." Deputy Collins was doing her best to maintain professional composure, but even she seemed amazed by the sheer audacity of Pamela's situation. "Ma'am, the sheriff's identity doesn't change the fact that you committed multiple crimes today," she said firmly. "You hired someone to steal a vehicle. You filed false reports with our dispatch center. You've been impersonating a position of authority." Each point she made seemed to drive Pamela deeper into shock and disbelief. "Ms. Hutchinson, let's review what happened here today," I said in my official capacity as sheriff. "You hired someone to steal my vehicle. You filed false reports with our dispatch center. You've been impersonating a position of authority for months. And you've been harassing law-abiding citizens with fake legal documents." Each point I made was like another nail in the coffin of her fake authority empire, and she could only stand there and listen as her entire fantasy crumbled around her. The woman who had terrorized neighbors with fake power was now face to face with real authority, and the contrast couldn't have been more stark. The live stream audience was witnessing something unprecedented. the complete and total destruction of a Karen's delusions of grandeur, broadcast live and documented forever. Comments were pouring in from viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing, with many saying they'd never witnessed such perfect karma in real time. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story, and the hashtags were already trending. Pamela had unknowingly created the most thoroughly documented case of fake authority meeting real consequences in internet history. "I didn't know," she said desperately, grasping for any possible escape from the hole she'd dug herself into. "You never told me you were the sheriff. This isn't fair. You tricked me." But I shook my head calmly, unmoved by her attempts to shift blame. "Ma'am, my job title doesn't change your behavior. You harassed Mr. Peterson into taking down his American flag. You threatened multiple neighbors with fake fines and fake legal action. You did all of that because you thought you could get away with it, not because you didn't know who I was." The truth of that statement seemed to hit her like a physical blow, and she actually staggered backward against her BMW. Deputy Collins had been documenting everything, and now she stepped forward with the evidence we'd need for any potential prosecution. "Sheriff, we have the live stream recordings showing her hiring the tow truck under false pretenses. We have recordings of her 911 call containing false statements, and we have multiple witness statements about her harassment activities over the past several months. The professional competence of my deputy, combined with the mountain of evidence Pamela had created herself, made this one of the most thoroughly documented cases I'd ever seen." The reality of her situation was finally beginning to penetrate Pamela's shock and denial. Her legs gave out completely, and she slumped against her BMW, sliding down until she was sitting on the ground with her back against the car door. The fake badges around her neck looked ridiculous now, like costume jewelry on someone playing dress-up. Her carefully constructed persona of authority had evaporated completely, leaving behind just a middle-aged woman who'd gotten carried away with a power fantasy and was now facing the real consequences of real crimes. The livestream was capturing every moment of her complete breakdown, creating a permanent record that would follow her for the rest of her life. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was electric. Deputy Collins began the formal documentation process while Pamela sat in her BMW with the door open, staring at the ground in complete defeat. The live stream was still running, broadcasting her humiliation to what had now become over 30,000 viewers, with major news outlets picking up the story and social media exploding with shares and commentary. But what happened next was something even more powerful than official law enforcement action. It was the community itself stepping forward to reclaim its dignity. Hank Peterson was the first to speak up, and his words carried the weight of every neighbor who'd been intimidated into silence. "Sheriff, I want to file a formal complaint about this woman," he announced, pointing at Pamela with righteous indignation. "She made me take down my American flag, the flag I've flown for 20 years to honor my service and my country. She threatened me with legal action if I didn't comply with her made-up rules." His voice grew stronger with each word, the voice of a man who'd found his courage again after months of being bullied. Other neighbors began coming forward with their own stories, and the pattern of harassment became clear. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the road described how Pamela had tried to fine her $50 for having garden gnomes that were supposedly non-compliant decorative items. The young couple with toddlers talked about being threatened with noise violations because their children played outside during quiet hours that Pamela had invented. Each story added another layer to the evidence of systematic neighborhood intimidation. "I've been documenting these activities for weeks," I explained to the growing crowd of neighbors and the thousands of live stream viewers. "Security cameras captured everything, including the incident with Mr. Peterson's flag. I pulled out my tablet and showed footage of Pamela harassing Hank 2 months earlier, complete with audio of her fake authority claims and threats. Seeing the evidence played back seemed to give Hank a sense of vindication that had been a long time coming. The most absurd discovery came when we examined Pamela's so-called HOA headquarters in her garage. Deputy Collins and I walked through what could only be described as an elaborate fantasy office, complete with hand-painted signs reading President's Office and Community Standards Department. Filing cabinets were filled with made-up violation reports on various neighbors, each one meticulously documented with photos and fake legal language. She'd created an entire bureaucracy in her head and tried to impose it on the real world. "Look at this," Deputy Collins said, holding up a folder labeled Enforcement Actions Pending. It contained detailed plans for expanding her fake authority, including ideas for vehicle registration requirements, pet licensing fees, and mandatory landscaping standards. The depth of her delusion was almost impressive, if it wasn't so harmful to the people she'd been terrorizing. She'd spent months building a fantasy empire based on nothing but intimidation and fake paperwork. The livestream audience was getting a front row seat to the dismantling of Pamela's fake authority structure. Comments were flowing in from viewers sharing their own experiences with neighborhood bullies and expressing satisfaction at seeing someone finally stand up to this type of behavior. News outlets were beginning to report on the story, and hashtags like Sheriff Justice and Karen Takes Down were trending on social media platforms across the country. But the most powerful moment came when we addressed the fake violation stickers that Pamela had placed on my truck. As I peeled off each one, reading the ridiculous charges aloud for the benefit of the live stream audience, the absurdity of her entire operation became clear. On my own property, blocking emergency access routes, to routes that didn't exist. Failure to comply with community vehicle standards that had never been established by any legitimate authority. Pamela was required to personally apologize to each neighbor she'd harassed, and watching her walk from house to house with Deputy Collins was like witnessing a complete reversal of power dynamics. The woman who terrorized people with fake authority was now reduced to asking for forgiveness from the very people she'd tried to intimidate. Her voice was barely audible as she admitted to each person that she'd had no legal right to make any demands or threats. The community response was gracious but firm. People accepted her apologies, but made it clear that her behavior had caused real harm and genuine fear. Hank Peterson summed it up best when he said, "I accept your apology, but I want you to understand that you made me feel like a criminal in my own home. You took away something that meant everything to me, and I almost let you do it because I was afraid of your threats." As we packed up the fake HOA materials from her garage, boxes of fraudulent documents, fake badges, and made-up legal forms, the symbolic nature of dismantling her empire of lies wasn't lost on anyone. The livestream captured every moment as Pamela carried box after box of her delusions to her car, the physical manifestation of her fake authority being literally removed from the community she'd tried to control. The final documentation included a formal agreement that Pamela would cease all claims of HOA authority, submit to regular check-ins with our department, and face immediate arrest if any future complaints were filed against her. But perhaps more importantly, the community had learned that they didn't have to accept abuse from people claiming fake authority. They'd seen what happened when someone finally stood up to a bully, and that lesson was worth more than any arrest could have provided. 1 month after what the internet had dubbed the Great HOA Takedown, life in our little corner of Pine Ridge County had returned to normal, but it was a better normal than we'd had before. Hank Peterson's American flag was flying proudly again, this time with a spotlight so it could be seen 24 hours a day. Neighbors were actually talking to each other over fences, sharing stories and looking out for one another in ways that genuine communities do. The fear that Pamela had instilled in people had been replaced by a sense of empowerment and unity. The viral video had taken on a life of its own, reaching over 5 million views across various platforms and spawning countless reaction videos, news reports, and social media discussions about fake authority and community justice. Law enforcement training academies began using the footage as an example of how patience and proper documentation can lead to better outcomes than immediate confrontation. The phrase, "sometimes the quiet neighbor has the biggest surprises," became a popular meme, often accompanied by screenshots of Pamela's face when she realized who I really was. Pamela herself had become something of a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ego and fake authority. She was required to attend weekly meetings with Deputy Collins, during which she had to report any interactions with neighbors and confirm that she wasn't attempting to assert any form of community authority. Social media had been restricted as part of her agreement, preventing her from trying to rebuild her fake empire online. The humiliation of her public downfall had been so complete that she rarely left her house except for necessary errands. My own career had benefited from the incident in unexpected ways. County commissioners praised the way I'd handled the situation, noting that patient investigation and community fee-free policing had achieved better results than aggressive enforcement might have. I was invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about dealing with fake authority scams and building community trust. The incident had become a textbook example of how real authority should be exercised, quietly, confidently, and always in service of the community. The educational impact extended far beyond our small community. Other counties began implementing verification systems for HOA claims, requiring official registration and documentation before any enforcement actions could be taken. Citizens became more aware of their rights when confronted by people claiming authority, leading to a significant decrease in fake HOA scams across the region. Pamela's failed power grab had inadvertently made communities safer from similar predators. Hank Peterson had become something of a local celebrity, giving interviews to news outlets about the importance of standing up to bullies and never backing down when you're in the right. His experience had resonated with veterans and civilians alike, and he'd received hundreds of messages of support from people who'd faced similar intimidation. The sheriff taught us that we don't have to accept abuse from anyone, he told reporters. Real authority protects people, fake authority just tries to control them. The technology angle of the story, with Pamela live streaming her own crimes, had made it a perfect case study for digital age justice. Legal experts pointed out how social media had both enabled Pamela's harassment campaign and ultimately provided the evidence for her downfall. The permanent nature of internet content meant that her behavior would follow her anywhere she tried to go, creating consequences that extended far beyond any legal penalty. 6 months after the incident, I received word that Pamela had quietly moved to another state, apparently hoping to escape the digital footprint of her humiliation. But the internet has a long memory, and her new neighbors quickly discovered her history when her name appeared in background checks and social media searches. The viral video had created a permanent record that would follow her for years to come, serving as an ongoing reminder of what happens when fake authority meets real justice. The lasting impact on our community was overwhelmingly positive. Property values had actually increased slightly, not because of any HOA enforcement, but because word had spread that we were a neighborhood where people looked out for each other and didn't tolerate bullies. Real estate agents began mentioning our community's response to the fake HOA incident as an example of the kind of place where families could feel safe and supported. The case had also sparked important conversations about the difference between legitimate community organizing and authoritarian intimidation. Several nearby neighborhoods had reached out for advice on dealing with similar situations, and I'd been able to help them understand their rights and options when confronted with fake authority figures. The ripple effects of standing up to one bully had empowered communities across the entire region. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm struck by how a simple decision to be patient and gather evidence had led to such a comprehensive victory for community justice. If I'd intervened immediately when Pamela first harassed Hank about his flag, she might have just moved on to terrorize some other neighborhood. Instead, by letting her reveal the full extent of her behavior, we'd been able to create a permanent record that would protect communities everywhere from her particular brand of fake authority. The final lesson, I think, is that real authority doesn't need to announce itself or demand recognition. It serves quietly, protects consistently, and acts decisively when the moment requires it. Fake authority, on the other hand, is loud, demanding, and ultimately fragile because it's built on nothing but intimidation and lies. When the two collide, as they did that day on my ranch, there's never really any doubt about which one will prevail. Justice might sometimes take its time, but it always finds a way to win in the end.